Julie, before we let you go, one other quick thing we want to ask you about this battle that's brewing between Republicans and federal judges. This is these judges who have issued rulings blocking parts of President Trump's agenda, like, for example, the one we've been talking a lot about with immigration, this current hold on deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. House Speaker Mike Johnson, he made some pretty aggressive comments yesterday floating the idea of eliminating federal courts. Let's play some of that.
We do have authority over the federal courts, as you know. We can eliminate an entire district court. We have power funding over the courts.
Okay, so the Republican Party is imploding, like actually falling apart in real time. And at the center of this absolute dumpster fire is Speaker Mike Johnson, the guy who was supposed to bring stability to the House after the chaos of the Kevin McCarthy era. The guy who was supposed to unite the party and get things done. Yeah, that guy. Well, turns out he's presiding over one of the most dysfunctional periods in congressional history, and Republicans are furious. We're talking open rebellion, walkouts from budget meetings, closed-door screaming matches, public accusations of incompetence, calls for his replacement, the whole 9 yards. And it's not just coming from one faction. It's coming from everywhere. Moderates hate him. MAGA hardliners hate him. Establishment Republicans hate him. Nobody's happy, and the party is crumbling because of it. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. So what went wrong? How did we get here? Well, it's a combination of things, but two major scandals have basically destroyed Johnson's speakership. First, there's the government shutdown debacle. Johnson completely mishandled it. He kept the House in what critics are calling an indefinite hiatus, basically just shut down operations for weeks while he tried to figure out a strategy. And during that time, nothing got done. No votes, no bills, no progress, just stalling and chaos. And Republicans watched their speaker basically paralyze Congress while the country waited to see if the government would shut down. That didn't go over well. People were pissed. They felt like Johnson was marginalizing Congress, undermining the institution, and making the party look completely incompetent. And they weren't wrong. But then, on top of that mess, comes the Epstein Files controversy. And this one is even more explosive, because this isn't just about legislative strategy or government funding. This is about a scandal that could potentially implicate powerful people. And Democrats in Congress have been pushing hard for full disclosure of all DOJ files related to Jeffrey Epstein. They want everything released. They want transparency. They want the American people to know who was involved and what the government knew about it. Pretty reasonable, right? Well, Johnson has been accused of blocking those efforts, of working behind the scenes to prevent the bipartisan release of files that could damage Trump and other Republican figures. And when that accusation started circulating, it set off a firestorm inside the GOP.
I'm curious what you make of Speaker Mike Johnson's leadership. He is from Louisiana, just like you are. He's standing his ground. He's saying that, hey, Republicans did what we had to do in the House, at least, to keep the government open. What do you make of his leadership in this moment?
Look, I think it's important to keep in mind that Speaker Johnson rallied the votes to pass an appropriations bill that opens government. He did his job. That's what he was charged to do.
Because here's the thing, not all Republicans want those files buried. Some of them actually believe in transparency. Some of them think that if there's damaging information in those files, it's better to get it out now and deal with it than to have it leak out later in a more damaging way. But Johnson apparently didn't see it that way. He allegedly worked to stall and block efforts to force the release. And when Republicans found out about that, when they realized their speaker was potentially covering up a major scandal to protect Trump and other party figures, they lost it. They felt betrayed. They felt like Johnson was putting Trump's interests above the party's interests. And they started openly questioning whether he should remain speaker. And Johnson's response to all this criticism? Absolutely terrible. Instead of trying to calm things down, instead of bringing people together and finding a path forward, he's been erratic and defensive. He snapped at reporters. He's abruptly shifted legislative strategy without consulting his own caucus. He's held tense backroom meetings with other GOP leaders that have reportedly devolved into shouting matches. Thomas Massie, one of the more independent-minded Republicans, has been openly critical. Elise Stefanik, who's normally a Trump loyalist, has apparently had harsh words for Johnson behind closed doors. The leadership team is fractured. Nobody's on the same page, and Johnson seems completely overwhelmed by it all. What we're witnessing is described by some observers as public panic. Johnson is visibly struggling. He's making mistakes. He's losing control of his caucus. And the more he struggles, the worse it gets. because once a speaker loses the confidence of his members, it's really hard to get it back. Once people start openly talking about replacing you, once walkouts and rebellions become common, you're basically done. And that's where Johnson is right now. He's a dead man walking. He might hang on for a while longer, but his authority is gone. His ability to lead is gone, and the Republican Party is paying the price for his failures. Now, why does this matter? Why should you care about internal Republican drama and whether Mike Johnson keeps his job? Because this isn't just about one person or one position. This is about the functionality of Congress. This is about whether the legislative branch can actually do its job. And right now, with Johnson's speakership in chaos, with Republicans fighting among themselves, with no clear leadership or direction, Congress is basically paralyzed. Bills aren't getting passed. Oversight isn't happening. The basic functions of government are breaking down, and that affects everyone. That affects you. Because when Congress doesn't work, nothing works. The government can't function properly. Problems don't get solved, and the country suffers. And then there's the political angle. We're heading toward the 2026 elections. Those are going to be huge. They're going to determine which party controls Congress for the second half of Trump's term. And right now, Republicans are a mess. They're divided, they're dysfunctional, they're consumed by scandal and infighting, and that's not a recipe for electoral success. Democrats are watching all this and salivating, because every day that Republicans spend fighting each other is a day they're not focused on winning elections. Every scandal that comes out, every leadership crisis, every public meltdown, that's ammunition for Democratic campaigns. So Johnson's failures aren't just hurting him personally, they're hurting the entire Republican Party. They're damaging the party's brand. They're making it harder for Republicans to win in 2026, and that could have massive consequences for the direction of the country. So yeah, this is a big deal. This is the Republican Party crumbling in real time. This is a leadership crisis that could reshape American politics, and it's happening right now, right in front of us. Let's dive in. All right, so let's dig into the details here, because there's a lot going on, and if you really want to understand why the Republican Party is falling apart, you need to understand both of the major scandals that are destroying Mike Johnson's speakership. Let's start with the government shutdown mess, because that's where things first started going seriously wrong. So Congress was facing a funding deadline. This happens periodically. The government needs money to operate, and Congress has to pass spending bills to authorize that funding. If they don't pass those bills by the deadline, the government shuts down. Non-essential services stop. Federal workers get furloughed. It's a mess, and it's politically damaging for whichever party is seen as responsible for causing the shutdown. Well, as the deadline approached, Johnson had to figure out a strategy, and his strategy was basically to do nothing. He kept the House in what the New York Times called an indefinite hiatus. He just shut down operations, sent everyone home, no vote scheduled, no committee meetings, nothing. And this went on for weeks. Republicans were sitting around waiting for their speaker to tell them what the plan was, and there was no plan. Or if there was a plan, Johnson wasn't sharing it. And meanwhile, the shutdown deadline kept getting closer, and the pressure kept building, and Johnson just kept stalling. Now, why would he do this? Why would a speaker paralyze his own chamber during a critical funding fight? Well, there are a few theories. One is that Johnson was trying to avoid a vote that would split his caucus. Republicans are deeply divided on spending. The hardliners want massive cuts. The moderates want to keep funding at current levels or even increase it in some areas. And Johnson knew that any bill he brought to the floor would probably lose votes from one faction or the other. So instead of forcing a vote and exposing those divisions, he just avoided the vote altogether. He kept the House shuttered and hoped the problem would somehow solve itself. But of course it didn't. The problem got worse. Because while Johnson was stalling, Senate Republicans and Democrats were negotiating their own deal, and when they finally reached an agreement, it was one that a lot of House Republicans hated. The Senate deal didn't include the spending cuts that hardliners wanted. It didn't address the policy riders that conservatives were demanding. It was basically a compromise that kept the government running, but didn't give Republicans much of what they wanted. And when that deal came over to the House, Johnson was in an impossible position. He could pass the Senate deal and anger the hardliners, or he could reject it and risk a shutdown that Republicans would be blamed for. Neither option was good. And his handling of this situation was catastrophic. Republicans started walking out of budget meetings. According to ABC 7 News, lawmakers were furious. They felt like Johnson had lost control, like he didn't have a strategy, like he was making it up as he went along and dragging the entire party down with him. And they started saying so publicly, not just anonymous grumbling to reporters, actual named Republicans going on record saying that Johnson's leadership was a disaster, that he was mishandling the spending bills, that he was losing control of both the moderate wing and the extremist wing of the party. And when your own members are publicly trashing you like that, you're in serious trouble. But Johnson's problems didn't end with the shutdown fight. In fact, that was just the warm-up act. The main event was the Epstein Files scandal. And this one is so much more damaging because it's not just about legislative tactics or budget negotiations. This is about a potential cover-up. This is about whether powerful Republicans are trying to hide information that could be politically explosive. So here's the background. Congress has been investigating the Jeffrey Epstein case. They've been demanding that the DOJ release all files related to Epstein's activities, his associates, his network. Democrats have been particularly aggressive about this. They want full transparency. They want every document released. They want the American people to see who was involved with Epstein and what the government knew about it. And there's good reason for this demand, because the Epstein case is one of the biggest scandals in modern American history. We're talking about a convicted sex offender who had connections to some of the most powerful people in the world, politicians, business leaders, celebrities. And there have been persistent allegations that some of those powerful people were involved in or knew about Epstein's criminal activities. So yeah, people want to know the truth. They want to see the files. They want transparency. Pretty reasonable. But according to multiple reports, Mike Johnson has been working to block those efforts. Democrats introduced initiatives to force the release of all Epstein-related files. And Johnson allegedly used his power as Speaker to prevent those initiatives from getting a vote. He stalled them in committee. He refused to bring them to the floor. He worked behind the scenes to kill them. And when this started becoming public knowledge, when reporters started writing about Johnson's efforts to block the Epstein file releases, Republicans went ballistic. Because a lot of them didn't know this was happening. A lot of them thought that transparency was the right approach, and they were furious to learn that their speaker was apparently covering for people who might be implicated in the Epstein scandal. Now, why would Johnson do this? Well, the obvious answer is that he was protecting Trump and other Republicans who might be damaged by what's in those files. Trump's connections to Epstein are well documented. They were friends for years. They socialized together. There are photos of them together. There are quotes from Trump praising Epstein. And while Trump has denied any wrongdoing and has said he cut ties with Epstein years ago, there's still concern among Republicans that damaging information could be in those DOJ files, information that could hurt Trump politically, information that could hurt other Republicans. So Johnson, being a loyal Trump ally, apparently decided that the best strategy was to just keep those files buried. Don't let them see the light of day. Hope the whole thing blows over. But that strategy backfired spectacularly. Because once Republicans found out what Johnson was doing, once they realized he was prioritizing Trump's interests over transparency and accountability, they felt betrayed. Even Republicans who like Trump, who support his agenda, started questioning whether this was the right approach. Because covering up a scandal doesn't make it go away, it usually makes it worse. And when the cover-up eventually fails, when information eventually leaks out, the political damage is even more severe. So a lot of Republicans looked at Johnson's handling of this and thought, what are you doing? You're making this worse. You're making us all look guilty. You're feeding into the narrative that we have something to hide. And then Johnson compounded his problems by how he responded to the criticism. Instead of being transparent, instead of explaining his reasoning and trying to bring people on board, he got defensive. He got angry. Reports suggest he had tense backroom meetings with other GOP leaders where things got heated. Thomas Massie, a libertarian-leaning Republican who's known for being independent in principle, has been openly critical of Johnson's leadership. Elise Stefanik, who's normally one of Trump's most loyal defenders in Congress, has reportedly clashed with Johnson over his handling of both the shutdown and the Epstein files. And when you got people from different wings of the party all agreeing that the speaker is doing a terrible job, that's a sign that things are really bad. And then there's Johnson's public demeanor. Multiple sources describe him as being in a state of public panic. He's snapping at reporters. He's giving contradictive answers to questions. He's abruptly shifting legislative strategy without explanation. He looks overwhelmed. He looks like someone who's in way over his head and doesn't know how to get out, and that creates a perception problem. Because if the speaker looks like he's panicking, if he looks like he's lost control, then members start to panic too. They start thinking, we need new leadership. We need someone who can actually handle this job. And once that perception takes hold, it's really hard for a speaker to recover. So now you've got this perfect storm of problems: the shutdown debacle, the Epstein files cover-up allegations, the public panic and erratic behavior, the backroom fights with other leaders, the walkouts and rebellions from rank-and-file members, all of it happening at once, all of it feeding into this narrative that Johnson is failing as speaker, and Republicans are watching this and realizing that they're in serious trouble heading into 2026 because voters don't like dysfunction, they don't like scandal, they don't like watching Congress be paralyzed by infighting, and every day that this continues is a day that damages the Republican brand and makes it harder for them to win elections. All right, let's break this down into the key points you need to understand, because there's a lot happening here, and it's important to separate the noise from what actually matters. Point number one, Mike Johnson is losing control of the House Republican caucus, and I mean really losing control. This isn't just a few members grumbling privately. This is open rebellion, walkouts, public criticism, calls for new leadership. When your own members are walking out of meetings and trashing you to reporters, you don't have authority anymore. You're a speaker in name only. And that's where Johnson is right now. He can't unite the caucus. He can't get people on the same page. He can't even keep people in the room during important meetings. That's a complete failure of leadership. Point number 2. The government shutdown mess exposed Johnson's inability to navigate difficult legislative situations. Being speaker isn't easy. You have to balance competing factions within your own party. You have to negotiate with the Senate and the White House. You have to make tough calls about what bills to bring to the floor and when, and Johnson failed at all of that. His strategy of just shutting down the House and hoping the problem would go away was pathetic. It was weak. It made him look incompetent, and it resulted in a deal that nobody was happy with. Hardliners felt betrayed because they didn't get their spending cuts. Moderates felt frustrated because the process was so chaotic, and the whole party came out looking dysfunctional and directionless. Point number 3, the Epstein Files controversy is potentially even more damaging than the shutdown mess, because this isn't just about legislative tactics. This is about whether Johnson was covering up a scandal to protect Trump and other Republicans, and the allegations are serious. Democrats wanted full transparency. They wanted all the Epstein Files released, and Johnson allegedly worked to block that. He prevented votes. He killed initiatives in committee. He did everything he could to keep those files from seeing the light of day. And when Republicans found out, when they realized what he was doing, a lot of them were furious, because covering up a scandal makes you look guilty. It makes it look like you have something to hide, and that's not a good look heading into an election year. Point number 4, Johnson's handling of the crisis has been terrible. Instead of taking responsibility, instead of being transparent and trying to rebuild trust, he's been defensive and erratic. He snapped at reporters. He's had angry confrontations with other leaders. He's made abrupt strategy shifts without consulting his caucus, and all of that just makes the situation worse. Because when you're in a crisis, when your leadership is being questioned, you need to project calm and confidence. You need to show that you're in control. But Johnson is doing the opposite. He looks panicked. He looks overwhelmed. And that creates a death spiral where members lose even more confidence in him, which makes him even more defensive and erratic, which makes members lose even more confidence. It's a cycle that's really hard to break. Point number 5. This isn't just a problem for Johnson personally. This is a problem for the entire Republican Party. Because when the speaker is this dysfunctional, when there's this much infighting and chaos, it paralyzes the entire legislative process. Bills don't get passed. Oversight doesn't happen. The party can't execute its agenda, and voters notice. They see the dysfunction. They see the scandals. They see Republicans fighting among themselves instead of governing, and that hurts the party electorally. It makes it harder to win in 2026. It damages the Republican brand. So Johnson's failures aren't just his own. They're dragging down the entire party. Point number 6. The split within the Republican caucus is deeper than just disagreements over Johnson. This is about fundamental divisions in the party. You've got MAGA hardliners who want total loyalty to Trump and aggressive confrontation with Democrats. You've got establishment Republicans who want to govern responsibly and maintain institutional norms. You've got moderates who represent swing districts and need to appeal to independents. And you've got libertarian-leaning members who prioritize principle over party. Getting all these factions to work together is incredibly difficult, and Johnson has completely failed at it. He's managed to alienate all of them. The hardliners think he's weak. The moderates think he's incompetent. The establishment thinks he's damaging the institution. Nobody's happy, and that makes it almost impossible to function as a caucus. Point number 7. The Epstein scandal specifically is snowballing in a way that's really dangerous for Republicans. Because this isn't going away, the media is all over it. Democrats are pushing hard for transparency. And every day that Republicans resist releasing the files, every day that it looks like they're covering something up, the worse it gets. The Nation described this as a snowballing scandal with Republicans running scared. And that's accurate, because the longer this drags on, the more people are going to assume that there's really damaging information in those files. The more it's going to look like Republicans are guilty of something. And if and when those files eventually do come out, if there's really explosive information in them, the political fallout is going to be massive. Point number 8, Johnson's troubles are creating an opportunity for Democrats. They're watching this dysfunction and planning how to exploit it. They're going to hammer Republicans on the Epstein cover-up allegations. They're going to point to the shutdown mess as evidence that Republicans can't govern. They're going to use every misstep, every scandal, every moment of chaos as campaign material for 2026. And they're going to make the argument that voters should give them control of Congress because Republicans have proven they can't handle it. That's a compelling message. And if Republicans can't get their act together, if they can't move past this dysfunction and scandal, it's going to resonate with voters. Point number 9, there are real questions about whether Johnson can survive as Speaker. Normally, once you're elected Speaker, you're pretty secure. It's really hard to remove a sitting speaker. You need a majority of the House to vote for someone else, which means your own party would have to turn on you in a really dramatic way. But we've seen it happen recently. Kevin McCarthy got ousted, so we know it's possible. And the knives are out for Johnson right now. People are openly talking about replacing him. They're discussing who might be a better leader, and if things continue to deteriorate, if more scandals emerge, or if the dysfunction gets even worse, we could see a real effort to remove him as speaker, and that would be absolutely chaotic, because finding a replacement that all the different factions can agree on would be incredibly difficult. We could end up with weeks of fighting over who should be speaker, just like we saw after McCarthy was ousted. Point number 10, this entire situation highlights the broader crisis in the Republican Party, because this isn't just about Mike Johnson. This is about a party that doesn't know what it wants to be anymore. Is it Trump's party? Is it a traditional conservative party? Is it a populist movement? Is it an establishment institution? Nobody knows, and different Republicans have different answers to those questions. And as long as that identity crisis continues, as long as the party is fundamentally divided about its purpose and direction, you're going to see this kind of dysfunction. You're going to see leaders who can't unite the caucus. You're going to see infighting and rebellion. You're going to see electoral struggles, because you can't win elections when your own party doesn't even agree on what it stands for. So where does this leave us? Well, we're watching the Republican Party crumble in real time. We're seeing a speaker who's lost control of his caucus. We're seeing scandals that keep getting worse. We're seeing dysfunction that's paralyzing Congress. And we're seeing all of this play out just months before a critical election. The next few weeks are going to be crucial. We're going to see if Johnson can somehow stabilize his speakership, or if the pressure becomes too much. We're going to see if more information comes out about the Epstein files and what role, if any, Johnson played in trying to suppress them. We're going to see if Republicans can find a way to unite around something, anything, or if they continue to fracture into warring factions. And we're going to see what all this means for 2026. Because if Republicans go into those elections looking this dysfunctional, if they're consumed by scandal and infighting, they're going to have a really hard time winning. Democrats are going to run on competence and stability. They're going to point to Republican chaos and say, we can do better. And voters might believe them, because right now Republicans are not putting their best foot forward. They're not showing that they can govern effectively. They're showing the opposite, and that's a problem. The Republican Party is in crisis. Mike Johnson's speakership is in crisis, and the implications of that crisis are going to ripple through American politics for a long time. So pay attention, because what happens next matters. It matters for Congress. It matters for the balance of power. It matters for the 2026 elections, and it matters for the future direction of one of America's two major political parties. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. Next time, we'll look at who might replace Johnson if he does get ousted, and what that leadership fight will look like. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss that.